Johnathan Logue of Logue & Co., you're very welcome to the Lead Well podcast.
Thank you.
So, Johnathan, I think a nice place for us to dive into our conversation was actually, as we were chatting offline for today, we spoke about this idea of what is a founder and defining what a founder actually is. And the way I described it to you is ultimately, in my opinion, when somebody has an idea and they're actually then willing to go and action on that idea, take that risk. If I think about your scenario, obviously a decade within LinkedIn, large organization, great role, but you had an itch that you wanted to scratch. You wanted to go back out there and build your own company, your own consultancy, Logue & Co. Tell me the process that you went through from going to that just being a thought in your mind to then you actually executing on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey that I found myself on in that, yes, you're right. I spent 10 years in LinkedIn and did a number of different roles, both in EMEA, in the European region, and then I had a role which was a little bit more global in scope. It got to the point where I was continuing to do great work with great people, but I was missing some of the work that I really liked to do and the impact that I really liked to have. And so having had a business previously to join LinkedIn in 2007, I knew that this was something that I've done before. And so from 2007 to 2014, I had my own business. And so it made it much more easy for me to look at it and go, okay, how am I going to go about getting the stuff that gives me joy? How am I going to go about doing the things that hopefully people are interested in learning from and buying? And how do I go about doing that? And that's the reason why I kind of set up Logue & Co. as being a way of doing the stuff that I do and enjoy more of than anything else.
And that's a brave move to make because you're talking about you want to do more of the stuff that you're really passionate about, that really gives you that level of fulfillment. But then there's the whole process of having the courage to then take that step. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I don't see that necessarily as being a difficult thing because you talk about process. Yes, there probably is, but I'm not smart enough to think too much about these things. And what I decided to do was see it as an opportunity to go and try something. And I remember when I set up my original business in 2007, I said to people, if it works, it'll be the best thing I ever did. If it doesn't work, I just go back and get a real job, right? And so it was very easy for me to go, it's okay if it doesn't work. And, we talk about failure and we talk about risk and those kind of elements. But I think if you've got something inside of you that you believe the world should see more of, I think it's in our best interest to go and follow that and to follow that kind of dream of, okay, how do I go about setting myself up? That's pretty straightforward. The cost of entry into consulting is relatively low because you're not building a product, you're not making a product, and there's not really, you can still do it from your kitchen table. So it's much easier to sort of start from there and then build from that. I think some of the decisions that I've made along the way, I would probably say, yeah, there's some better decisions that I could have made. There's maybe some decisions that I'm happy that I took another course of action on. So from that point of view, I think just going, was it a process? No. Was there something that I wanted to do differently? Yes. Was I looking for a change in what I was doing? Absolutely. So, working for a US multinational like LinkedIn is an incredible honor. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to really test my skills, work with some really amazing people and do some really interesting work. But there comes a time when you can find yourself getting lost in an organization of the size of LinkedIn, 26,000 people, where there's an opportunity to do something else. And that's the reason why I left at the end of February, and I've been going Logue & Co. ever since.
Excellent. And when you think about, because you mentioned there that you previously ran a business as well.
Yeah.
What for you has been the biggest difference between first time round, this time round? How has it changed for you as a business founder this time round?
Great question. So I think when I went out with my original business, I called it PeopleWorks. And the reason why I called it PeopleWorks is because it was a kind of play on, this is about working with people. And my intention then in 2007 was very much to build a business, to build a company and start to find people that I could work with in that company. And unfortunately, things sort of changed a little bit in the economy. So 2008, 2009, it was tough enough. So it was very much me working as a consultant, in my own company, in my own business. This time round, I've decided that the reason why I've called it Logue & Co. is because I've learned at my time at LinkedIn how important collaboration is and that relationships matter. It's one of the things that they would talk about an awful lot at LinkedIn. And so I want to work with others in doing great work for clients. And if that's one or two other people or three or four other people, depending on the project that I'm working on, my work is in service of those clients. And the way I can do that best is by finding who are the people that can come along with me, who are the company that I can keep as part of Logue & Co. to do that kind of work. And that's what I'm being more intentional this time round at doing. I think secondly, and maybe many of your founders will probably know this, it's very hard to say no when you're a founder, when you're starting up. Whatever it is you're doing, you come along, there's an opportunity for you to do something. Somebody comes along and wants to offer you a piece of work. It's very, very hard to say no to that. And I think one of the things I've learned between my lessons of 2007 right the way through to today is I'm trying to be a little bit more careful about the work that I take on and the work that I seek, and not maybe say yes to everything.
And can you go a little deeper on that? Because I think that's something that will resonate with a lot of our listeners. Naturally we get stuck in the short-term mindset as a business owner or founder. As you said, we kind of take the work that's there in front of us without really sometimes seeing how that contributes to the longer vision. But what you mentioned there about, seeking the work that really aligns with you, but also maybe having a network where if you do get a request, you have somebody there to say, right, that's not really what I'm doing right now, but I have the right person for you.
Yes. And that requires confidence, Mark. I really do think that requires confidence to be able to go, I love what you're trying to do here. You may think I'm the person for you, but actually I don't think I am. But I know somebody who does. I know somebody who's much better placed at this. Is it okay if I introduce you to them? And there's a great sense of courage in being able to do that by saying, I'm not the person that you need for what you're looking for, but I know somebody who does. And I know somebody who's very, very skilled and very competent at this work. And I'm going to connect you to. I'm going to make that happen. I think another point, and it comes back to just the point around that network. There's this concept, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard before, is around this personal board of directors. So that personal board who are the people around you that you can sort of ask for information for, you can seek advice from, that you can, that will listen to you, and also those that probably won't listen to you when you need to be not listened to, if that makes sense. So who are the people, and the more diverse that group is, the better. But they're in your corner, but they're willing to sort of listen to what it is that you're trying to do, bounce ideas off, come to them with an idea and say, listen, can I just play this through with you? Because I'm not quite sure if this is the right thing for me to do. What do you think? And having that kind of board of trusted advisors or personal board of directors is incredibly important as you kind of sense make through what it is that you choose to do, how do you go about doing that work, and all that kind of the stuff that goes with it.
And it's actually really interesting that you mentioned that, because I've spoken on this podcast previously just about bits of research that I've done most recently. And one of the aspects was interviewing CEOs around aspects that support their performance. Mm-hmm. And what they mentioned was peer network, coaching, mentoring, and the board of advisors that you're speaking about there, those 4 or 5 people. Absolutely. That really encapsulates that. But I also think it's something for a business owner or founder that they may not carve the time out for. They may not see the immediate importance, bringing it back again to probably that short-term, long-term, and bouncing constantly between both of those worlds. Is that something that you have found to be a difficult process to master?
Yes, and I'm not there yet. I'm still a beginner. So yes, I think that's an important point to make, because I think as a founder or a business owner, you're looking long-term and then also short-term. And I think it requires a sort of almost a polarity of view in how you engage your brain, because you've got what's in the here and now. So, talking to clients, talking to prospects, in my case, doing business development and all that kind of stuff on the here and now, while also then looking for, well, what is it that I'm trying to create here? What am I building? What am I seeking? What am I building towards? And how do I go about getting there? And I think that's almost like that polarity of, yes, there's the here and now, but then how are you giving your time into where this business is going to go in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years? And how do you go about finding the time to split almost your attention, because that's what we're talking about here is attention and focus, into, okay, there's the here and now, and there's the there and then. And how do I get from the here and now? Because that's what I need to be working on right now. And then the there and then is, well, why am I in this in the first place? What is it that I am doing now that means something to me and that builds that purpose, which is less about the transactions of sometimes of the daily work, but into I am doing this for a reason because of what it gives me in work, outside work, from work. What am I doing to the community, for the community? What am I doing, for myself and my family? I think that's an important distinction, and it does require that kind of polarity of view, and whether you're long-sighted or short-sighted in the decisions that you make, making sure that you have to play both polarities.
And as you're speaking there, what's really resonating for me is this idea of, and I'd be very interested to get your opinion on this, based on running your own business, but also working with senior leaders within LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. The importance of having clarity on that there and then. I often find, even through my own practice and my own coaching with clients, that you'll sit with somebody and they'll give you, let's use a business owner's example, might be, I want to double our revenue next year. And you'll dig into that with them. And before you know it, you realize, actually, that is not a goal that really is motivating them. It's not something that's at their core. Mm-hmm. They've just said it because it sounds quite good, but it's not really resonating with them. So it's not their real there and then, if you like. It's not their real long-term vision. When you dig into that long-term vision, what you said, you hear more about how them running the business contributes to their family life, how they get to give back to the community, how they're making a difference in their industry. And when they uncover that, all of a sudden, that's fire in the belly, that's motivation. I'm just curious to your experience personally, but also with the work you've done in the last decade around that with senior leaders.
Yes, and this is something that I've certainly spent quite a bit of time thinking about more. When it comes to coaching, for example, and I suppose as a coach, one of the things that we do is to ask powerful questions. And as a coach, you should be creating powerful questions. And what I mean by that is those questions that you ask that aren't immediately answerable, because they're the kind of powerful ones. And one of the things that I would talk about in coach training would be avoiding or be careful of the use of the why question, right? Because if you ask a question and say why, it could come with a bit of judgment. Yeah. And you don't want that, because you don't want a coachee or the person that you're coaching reacting to that. However, coming back to your original point, there's something here about the 5 whys. Or if you want to go more, you want to go even deeper, what are the 7 whys? So why is that? Why is that? Why is? So you continue to ask the why, because to your point that you get there, you get away from maybe some of the more of the day-to-day, and you get into the real deeper, okay, what is connecting with you at your core? And what is it more purposeful that we can then start to really work on that's going to help you with the business about where you want it to go to in the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. But hopefully then that's going to guide and direct some of the ways that you go about dealing with the day-to-day, because you now know what it's connected to. Not only is it connected to your own values and what's more important for you more purposefully, but it's also then connecting to what's happening in the business and what's going to happen longer term that you're creating.
And it's a great service to give another human being the opportunity to explore those 7 whys, because I think it's certainly common to not have a full understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. I know that that could sound like somebody's listening to that thinking, of course I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. But every now and again, I like to go back to those 7 whys. I like to dig in again, because life moves so fast. Things are always changing. That reason at the core can be changing from time to time without us even realizing it.
Yes, absolutely. So even in my work with sales leaders, for example, we would very quickly get to what's important. And they go, I'm coin operated. Okay. I am purely coin operated. I am in the business of making money for myself. And that's great. Fantastic. And that's the reason why they probably got into sales. But then you get to a point where if you're talking to sales leaders, you're asking them a bit more about what's important to them. You tend to hear less about that coin operatedness and probably more about something that's a little bit more about what their legacy is, what they want to do for their family, but also maybe what they want to do in terms of self-actualization and how they want to, live a life well lived.
When we think about it from a smaller business, you've got maybe 8 to 10 people. You're doing some work with the founder on these 7 whys. They're able to tap in. Now all of a sudden, they understand the real purpose. But you've got another 8 or 9 people that you've got to bring along on this journey with you. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about tips, advice that you would have based on your experience for business owners when it comes to getting the rest of the team bought into that vision that you've now uncovered, you've got real clarity on. How do we translate that so that all of a sudden the people who most influence our success are also bought in now to this vision?
Yeah, I think there's something very important about the clarity of that vision. And so in my work, I'm an associate faculty for the IMI. And in the program that I deliver on there, I talk about being so clear on your vision that you can put it on a Post-it note. Because what happens is, things get lost in translation. And so as we know from, playing any kind of game in the playground, that when you're passing a secret on between one person to the next person to the next person, it gets a bit lost in translation, right? So this is about making sure that what your clarity of vision is and the purpose of what you're doing can be written on a Post-it. I think that's very, very powerful. We also know that writing something short takes a lot longer than writing something longer. So the more that we can get that brevity into what that vision looks like, then I think there's something there that's easily communicated to others. Now, again, we also know that sustaining something like that is very, very important. And this is where communication is really important, but also what's in it for them. Defining what that why is, and then really connecting it to what people are there to do and what's important. Right? But I think then, like I said, the communication is very important, but then the sustaining mechanisms that go into that as well, because it's so easy. You mentioned it earlier on, Mark, about where things are very busy. We all have attention deficit that we cannot sort of be able to deal with that over time. And so how you go about making sure that that singular vision, that purpose about what we're here to do as a company, for example, is shared amongst others. And that also people feel that they can ask questions and learn more about what this is all about. And that journey that we're going on together to create and build something that is going to be worthwhile.
I think you're hitting on so many useful points there for listeners. And I think if we were to try to practically apply that for our listeners, founders, business owners, I think you said, obviously, getting that individual to really understand the contribution that they're having to that overall vision. And I think sometimes we make the mistake as business owners as we grow, because again, let's think about it. We might be relatively small, 5 or 6 people, and then all of a sudden there's a big growth spurt and we've now got 10 to 12 people. And I think as business owners or founders or even managers at times, it's the idea of, do what I do. I'm going to show you the way and just copy what I do. Come along with me on the journey. But I don't think that works. I think maybe in years gone by, that autocratic leadership style may have been something that we would have, I wouldn't even say something that we would have been motivated by, but it may have been something that we would have just accepted. Whereas now we want managers, leaders, we want them to really try to understand us, really offer us the recognition, identify our contribution. And that takes time and takes skill as a business owner, founder, manager. What have you seen from your years of dealing with those exact characters I'm describing, helping them to be able to practically apply some of what we're speaking about here?
Yeah, I think being a founder and being a people manager or people leader are two of the hardest and most rewarding jobs out there. And if you're one of those people that is lucky enough to be a founder and a people manager or leader, you're lucky in being able to do that, but it also creates a huge amount of challenge. And it is really, really hard to be able to do both and to do both well. I think from my own point of view, what I've seen and I've learned this certainly in my time at LinkedIn is that one size doesn't fit all. It has to be one size fits one. So when it comes to actually looking at your team, for example, it's not about a team. It's about a group of individuals that are emotionally connected, because that's what makes a team different from a group. But then also that each one of those has needs, wants, and wishes, desires, everything that you have to be able to understand and work with and manage. So I think this is where, and we also know, like, all change is personal and emotional from that point of view. So each one of those individuals that you're trying to bring on a journey, they're going to have fears, uncertainties, or doubts about what's happening, what's going on, what the future holds. And they're trying to marry that with, well, what is it that I want? What is my role in all of this? And how am I going to bring that discretionary effort to this team, to this organization, to this business? One of the things that I've found that works really well, and I think you mentioned it just there in passing, is around how do you go about recognizing the contribution? This is not that everybody gets a medal. This is not, we're not in the business of, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. But what I'm saying here is its importance of, as a leader or as a founder, being able to recognize the contributions that people are making. So being specific about what that is that they've done, then talking about the impact that it's making and the difference it's making to your customers. And those kind of very, very simple strategies that you talk about, whether it's around, one size fits one versus one size fits all, whether it's thinking about how do I go about recognizing those people around me? How do you go about offering feedback and also receiving feedback from those individuals as well? And if you're sort of tying some of those kind of critical skills together, I think that makes a much more potent mix for being not only a great founder, but a great people manager and a great leader. And I think here we also, and this, we mentioned this before we started, is around how do you go about building that trust? Because what we know is that trust is sort of, earned in drops and lost in buckets. And we see it in public life. We see it in organizational life, that, people start to, it can build trust very, very well, but it can also get lost very, very quickly. And so how do you become that trusted leader, a leader that people will go, I'm going to follow that individual. I'm going to follow them because they're a great manager and they're a great founder. And how do we go about making sure that as founders, as people managers, that we can continue to, learn and improve, but also role model what we expect in others for others?
And would you agree that the recognition versus the feedback, that there's, and it's not to say that you can't deliver both in this way, but recognition sometimes is better given in the group, in the team. So Johnathan, you've done a really great job this week, and here's why. Mm-hmm. But when we're delivering the feedback, and yes, it could be that the team have not performed as well as we would have hoped, but you deliver that feedback one-to-one in a way where the environment is safe, in a way where, as you say, they can, come back at you and they can offer their feedback and how they've actually seen the situation. Would you recommend that as we're trying to manage and build that trust, that we do small things like that, where recognition is given in public and things like criticism or feedback are more so delivered one-to-one?
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes total sense. So often we have heard using the feedback sandwich, for example.
Yeah.
And the feedback sandwich for your listeners would be positive feedback, developmental feedback, positive feedback. So it looks like and feels like a sandwich whereby you're starting with something good, you're putting something in the middle that you want to talk to them about, and then you finish off with that kind of positive feedback. The trouble is our brains are not natural cheerleaders. So if I know that you're going to give me some feedback using the feedback sandwich technique, I know that the first bit I'm going to discredit because I'm going to wait for the next bit. And then I'm going to sit and wallow when you give me the bit in the middle. And then when you go to then finishing off strong, you think you're finishing off strong. I'm still wallowing in the bit you're giving me in the middle. So the reason why I say all that is because how managers and founders go about giving that feedback is incredibly important. And how do we go about finding the right time, the right place, the right way of doing this? And to your point that you made, secondly, is around as leaders, as founders, how do we go about being receptive to feedback? How do we go about receiving feedback in a way, sometimes I'm not going to believe everything that I'm offered feedback on. But this is about how we go about seeking for, well, maybe there's a grain of truth in this. Let me expose the grain of truth or be curious about the grain of truth rather than dismissing it all out of hand. Because what we're talking about here is there can be some really, really good stuff there. The question that I sometimes ask leaders is, what's interesting and what's useful? Okay, because the feedback can be interesting, but what's then useful? Or how do I go about making sure that I get more useful feedback than just interesting feedback? And I think that's a useful way of looking at it and going, how do I get better at getting better, but also how do I encourage others and role model others to get better at getting better as well? I used to work in O2 many, many years ago, before my first business. And I remember one of the advertising slogans that they would have used was, why standing still is the new going backwards. Why standing still is the new going backwards. In other words, if I'm standing still, I'm actually going backwards because the people that I work with, the business, our customers, our competitors, they're all moving ahead. And if I'm not moving and developing with that, I'm actually being left behind. And that was very powerful for me then, and it's still powerful for me today.
Yeah, and I think we consider and we've spoken about it already, the big outcome, the big vision. But where that breaks down normally is actually the small bits we're talking about here, those day-to-day processes, and trying to get them right. And as you've said, that can be really difficult for somebody who is maybe in a founder's position or a small business owner or even a manager, because it's not uncommon for us to see managers get promoted to that position based on their technical expertise. And then all of a sudden they're giving feedback or they're having those performance conversations. And it's not something that is necessarily coming naturally to them. And all of a sudden, that team dynamic is just going south very, very quickly as a result.
Yes, absolutely. And so there is something here about the role that senior leaders play in spotting potential issues and potential areas of concern. And this is where leading with curiosity is so important. It's very easy for us to infer based on what we've seen in one situation. And so the way I liken it, I remember hearing a story from a previous senior executive, HR executive at LinkedIn, and she would say, right, she's heard some information. It'd be what she would call a ping. And a ping would be a bit like a sonar on a ship or a submarine. You hear a ping, and she wouldn't act on the first ping. But if she heard multiple pings on a situation or about a particular team or about a particular leader, then she would go and investigate. So in other words, it's remaining curious and open, hearing the first ping, okay, I'm not going to do anything with that right now. But when you hear the ping a number of times, that's when you have to go and think about, how can I go about offering some help, support, address this issue before it becomes a bigger one?
When you consider where we're at now in terms of obviously rapidly changing in terms of from a digital perspective, you've got remote work thrown into the mix now, which obviously is here for good, even though some mandates are coming in. I think people enjoy that flexibility. Yeah. Naturally, I find from my experience that having to manage somebody from afar makes things quite difficult. It's certainly more difficult than maybe managing them in person. If you think about from a talent development perspective, what are we getting wrong now as founders, as managers? What are the areas where we're not hitting the mark, we're not getting it right for the people that are essentially looking to us to guide them the right way?
Yeah, I think for this one, we're still missing out on that real human connection, because technology has improved so fast over the last couple of years. I think one of the importance of that three-dimensional view that we have of others means that we get to pick up on that body language. We get to pick up on what's said, but also what's not being said. In this virtual world that we're now in, where we're now hybrid working, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days from home, I think it's very hard for managers to really make sure that they are remaining close to and in contact with their direct reports, those people that work for them, and those were people that support them. And I'm not saying that you can't do it, but you have to be much more intentional about how you go about doing that. How more intentional do you go about making sure that you're spending time connecting with those individuals on your team that you don't see maybe all the time? If you have a remote team, for example, that's outside of the country that you're in, you may not see them any more than once or twice a year. And so how do you go about making sure that you have those meaningful points of contact that mean that you are understanding more about what's going on outside of work for them, and how can you help and support them when maybe they're going through, whether it's challenges with work or challenges feeling a bit isolated or away from the team. I think there's also something here, the importance of bringing your team together. If you do have a dispersed or remote team, that you bring them together as much as possible, as frequently as possible, for a mixture of both work and non-work activity. And so what I mean by that is that if you get a chance to bring them together once a year, that you use that to really build that connection, that connective tissue that's required. Because I've seen from my own experience, although it being anecdotal, you can see that connection that lasts when you bring people together first in person. They get to see each other, they get to meet each other, they get to break bread together. And then when they go back to their remote locations, there still is that connection that happens. And so how do you go about making sure that you're being more intentional once a month, once every 2 months, where you're going, okay, we're going to spend some time together. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to do some work. And then we're also going to have some social stuff, because not everybody's going to love all the social stuff, but that feeling of being part of something greater requires emotional energy from everyone, right? And that's the difference, like I said, about groups and teams. And so there is this, we are in this together, which is, I think, is a very, very important thing that happens. And it's up to the leader to make sure that that happens, and that you're cultivating and growing and making sure that happens. So whether you look at it from a morale budget point of view, that you're able to set aside some money for whatever it is that you want to do, you can do some really, really interesting and fun stuff very, very cheaply with a team that are dispersed, but yet you're bringing them together in a way that you're still able to learn from and see each other and feel that connective tissue with each other.
Yeah, it's a great answer, great response, because I think there's a massive consequence when we miss that mark, when we don't have that intentionality around it. And someone you'd know well, I'm sure, from IMI, Simon Boucher, he spoke about when he was CEO at the IMI, he saw it as being the culture catalyst. He was the chief culture officer. Yeah. It was his role to basically create that environment, that connective tissue that you're mentioning there. And if he wasn't doing that, it was the realization that nobody was actually doing that. So how are we going to have that, I suppose, again, that connective tissue, that feeling towards one another, that we are in a team, we are in this together? Because if we don't have that within our organization, small, medium, or large, what's to stop us then going to the next company who offer us similar benefits and a higher salary?
Absolutely. I think the IMI is a good example, and Simon is a great leader for describing himself as being that kind of chief culture officer, because there's many of your founders that would probably have this in their own organization, whereby they've probably got some full-time employees, and then they may have contractors or associates or something. And so how do you go about making sure that for those people that are contract workers or that are associates of you, how do you go about making sure that they get a sense of what's important for us as an organization? And that requires something slightly different, but still intentional in how you go about building that connective tissue, even though they may not be full-time employees of yours, but they have a vested interest in the success of your business. And I think that's something that founders need to work on, especially, which is really important for them to think about, okay, how do I go about making sure that even though they're associates or contractors, that they still feel that they're part of something here?
Excellent. And I think the way that you described it earlier on about having them really feel like you understand their journey, their goals, their wants, needs, desires, even if they are a contractor, giving them that time to develop that relationship and then referring back to that time and time again. I often see that nearly as step number one. You've got to really carve that out. Don't put your wants and desires first, even if it's a contractor. Yes, it's great they may feel it's great to come in and work for this organization.
Absolutely.
But it's then you flipping that around a little bit and saying, no, hold on a minute. Tell me more about you. Tell me more about what it is you're looking to achieve. And then I'll tell you about what we're looking to achieve and how we're going to look to move forward. I often find just starting the relationship on that foot can be extremely effective, whether it's an employee, contractor, etc.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
You said something to me the other day that really has actually stuck with me since, and it was the idea of how we manage the level of agency versus the level of jeopardy we have as business owners and founders. I'm curious in terms of your process around, now that it's relatively fresh again, how you've managed to get to grips again with, yes, you've got the high decision-making power now, but also with that comes the responsibility, the jeopardy, we might say. So how have you got to grips with that again in the last few months?
Yes, I remember when I joined LinkedIn in 2014, a lot of my friends and associates would have said to me, "Goodness, you've gone for an employee role again. Like, what does that feel like? Because you've had your own business for 7 years and you're now in-house." And it was very easy for me to square that away, because on the one hand, yes, there's a loss of autonomy in terms of the work that I get to do, because I'm now part of, as I was then, the team that supported the region in EMEA. But then what you then get is you get this collegiality, you get collaboration, and you get to be inspired by working with some really great people every day. When it's happened this time round, I think the way I've looked at it has been much more around how do I go about bringing the 25 or 30 years of experience to other companies, to other individuals, that I think that I'd like to think that I can share that with them. That, of all the organizations that I've worked on, I've been very, very lucky to work in over 100 different organizations over the last 20 or 30 years. How do I go about bringing that to them? And what role do I play in their growth and in their development, with just saying, listen, I've just happened to be very, very fortunate that I've worked in these amazing companies. How do I go about doing that and bringing that to life? And how can I go about supporting you as you start or continue on your own growth journey? I think now I'm in a position whereby, yes, I have left a deeply collaborative and a wonderful group of people that I'm still in contact with, and I missed hugely. And the work that we would have done as well would have been incredibly powerful. But this is for me at a time in my life where I'm kind of going, how do I go about bringing that to others? And how do I go about taking those insights, taking those learnings, sharing my missteps and mishaps with others in a way that hopefully they don't make the same mishaps and missteps that I made.
And yeah, I really like what you're describing there. Giving back, offering ultimately all that value you've gained over the last, 2 to 3 decades in the work that you've done, and being able to give that back now to clients. If somebody was listening today and they were in a relatively steady role where they felt they have a desire to do something, they have a desire to do exactly that, maybe bring their experience and bring their value to the market, but do it in a way where they have more agency. But there's that little voice inside their head saying, but things here are relatively comfortable, don't go messing things up. What would you say to that person in terms of to go and take that risk and start that business? What would your advice be to that person?
Oh, goodness, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think I remember a very good friend of mine saying to me when I launched my first business, he said, "I know what you do, what can I buy? I know what you do, what can I buy?" And I wasn't selling photocopiers, and I wasn't selling cupcakes. I was selling a service. I was selling a promise. And so, in answer to your question, I think you have to think about what it is that gets you up in the morning. What is it that you think has some value? What do you think people are going to buy from you? And how do you go about finding out more about what that's going to look like? Because, as you know, and many of your listeners know, is being a founder can be very, very challenging. It can be really, really challenging. And what's interesting about this is, and founders will know this rather than those who've always worked for a company or for others, is that founders know and are reminded every day of their value. Because we do a piece of work, or we sell a cupcake, or we sell a photocopier, and we know the value of that transaction, right? Getting a monthly salary working for an organization gives you a sense of that on a monthly basis, but not on a daily basis that you sometimes get with a founder. And so, in answer to your question, I think this is about really having a good hard look at yourself about whether you want to do this or not. And you have to look, first of all, at the financials and the commercials. What is it that you are seeking in terms of what can support you and sustain you? And that could be very, very little, which means that you probably have a better chance of being able to make something from that. Or, you've got many sort of financial obligations that you cannot really risk something as that would create more jeopardy for you, because there's nothing worse. And I've seen it an awful lot, certainly in the coaching community, whereby very, 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 very experienced professionals have gone and done coaching and then thought, I'm just going to set myself up as a coach, in a coaching business. And it's a very, very difficult and very, very challenging and very, very crowded market. And so in order to be very, very impactful with because again, coaching is, highly, very sort of practical, very, very developmental and highly personalized, right? And that requires an awful lot of energy from both the coach and the coachee. But you can't do that 7 days a week for 7 hours a day. You have to find
there's a ceiling there.
There's a ceiling in terms of what you can do and the value that you can bring and the impact that you can make, because you just can't do it all day, every day. And so you have to think about, well, what is it that I'm going to be able to survive with, or what is it that I'm going to be happy with? But what's going to be the trade-off in terms of what comes in that I can survive on for my family or for myself? But what is the difference that I can make to others? And is there a value in that? Is there something that people can buy?
Yes, you've identified, and I'm sure it's a nice timely reminder for business owners as well, what you've identified there. And it's been mentioned on this podcast in previous times when I've asked a similar question. Be very clear on what it is you're selling, because exactly that. A lot of the time we think as owners with the idea or founders with the idea, we think there's real value in it. But how do I communicate that value to somebody else, turning it into something tangible that they can buy? I think you've got to be so clear on that, especially if you're in a field like ours, where if it is coaching, sometimes it's not as tangible to understand, okay, well, what am I buying? What's the transaction here? I pay you X amount for my coaching session. Mm-hmm. What am I getting in return? So being able to articulate what that is. But I think you're right, going even a step before that and asking yourself, if this really is something serious that I want to do, have I got a 6-month roadmap here in terms of, right, it might take me 6 months to build up a bit of traction with this business. Can I sustain myself for that time?
Absolutely.
If not, how do I put myself in a position where I can actually do that? Because I think what really stood out to me in what you said was a lot of people decide not to do it because they look at it and say, no, I wouldn't be able to do that today. I wouldn't have the financials behind me to be able to do something like that. And they can dismiss the idea very quickly versus, okay, I can't do it right now today, but actually, if I approach this in a certain way, in 6 months' time, I'll be able to give myself a 6-month, lead in or roadway to actually try this and give this a go.
Absolutely. I think something else that, and I'm speaking to a friend of mine at the moment about this, because she's looking to leave her role and go out on her own and set herself up. And she's got the fears and the doubts that every founder has, or everybody that's thinking about doing something for themselves has. She's amazing. She's quite phenomenal in what she's doing. But we talked about, rather than going, I go from here to here, how can I go about integrating it into my current role, that I'm doing this on the side, like a side hustle,
yes.
Or like, how do I go about doing this in a way that gives me an opportunity to do this as a side gig, if I can use that term. And so what I'm talking to her about and what she's sort of planning and thinking about for herself is, in her current role, yes, keep that role going, but can I do this in a way that integrates into my life, but gives me 5 or 10% of the time that I have to invest in seeing if this is going to work or not.
Very smart way to do it.
And so it means then after 6 months or 7 months or 8 months, she's able to look back and go, okay, can I sustain myself on this on a 5-day a week or a 4-day a week or a 3-day a week? Or do I actually need to find a way of doing a portfolio?
Yeah.
And becoming a portfolio worker where I'm doing something for 3 days a week or 4 days a week. And then on my other day or two a week, I'm doing something that I want to do for myself in order to build it out.
Yeah.
And so the world is now set up for that in a much more better way than it was 20 or 30 years ago, where you did a job or you did another job. And there wasn't this way of mixing and matching and bringing them together. So, if anybody who's thinking about doing it, I would be saying to them, how do you go about integrating that into what you're doing right now, even to a 5%, 10%, and learning from the process as you describe it?
That's an excellent piece of advice. We've one final question for you, Johnathan, and this is the question we ask to finish the podcast. So if you have one lesson that you would like to leave our listeners with from your experience as a coach, running your own business, but also working within large organizations, what one lesson would you leave our listeners with moving forward from today?
Always be learning. Always be learning. Right. So it's one of the maxims that I've learned over the last sort of 10 years especially, has been always be learning, always be try to improve. How do you go about getting better? How do you go about sharpening your own soul? To quote Stephen Covey, how do you go about being better at what it is that you do, whatever your role is, whatever job you have, whether you work for a founder, whether you're a founder yourself, how are you going to go about getting better at what it is that you do? And, in the role of being a founder, in the role of being a people manager or a leader of a team, how are you going about improving yourself? And so, that would be my number one would be always be learning and always being more intentional about that. And then if you were going to give me a second one, just because, I would probably, my golden ticket would be that the role modeling curiosity. Role modeling curiosity. Not being curious, that's different. I'm asking and I'm sort of inviting your listeners to role model curiosity. Being more curious for longer when it comes to challenges that you're facing in your business, dealing with people that report to you, leading teams, whatever it is that you're doing, talking to customers, getting annoyed by what competitors are doing that you're not, all those things. Role modeling that curiosity is incredibly powerful, because what that does is that offers a bit of psychological safety to your team to also remain curious and be open to learning.
Johnathan Logue of Logue & Co., thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.